Picture this: 2 million slaves breaking free from the world's superpower in a single night. Imagine the sea splitting in half, bread falling from heaven, and a mountain literally on fire with God's presence. The book of Exodus isn't just another Bible story. It's the greatest liberation narrative ever told and the foundation stone of biblical faith. Here God transforms from a distant promise into an active deliverer, revealing his character through miracles that defy nature itself. This is where the Ten Commandments thunder from Sinai, where the Passover lamb foreshadows Christ's sacrifice, and where God's glory descends to dwell among his people. Every prophecy about Jesus, every symbol of salvation, every pattern of worship finds its origin in these explosive 40 chapters. Exodus reveals why God chose Israel, how he keeps his promises, and what it truly means to be redeemed. Prepare to witness the book that shaped civilization and still transforms lives today. Years had passed since Joseph saved Egypt from famine. A new king rose to power who didn't know Joseph's story. The Israelites had grown from a small family into a huge nation. Chapter 1, verse 7 tells us the Israelites were fruitful and multiplied greatly and became exceedingly numerous, so that the land was filled with them. This wasn't just normal growth. This was explosive multiplication that caught everyone's attention. The transformation was remarkable. What started as 70 people who came to Egypt with Jacob had become hundreds of thousands. They filled entire regions of Egypt. Their children were strong, their families were large, and their numbers kept growing. It was as if God had turned on some supernatural blessing that made them multiply faster than any other people group in history. The new Pharaoh looked at these people and got scared. What if they joined Egypt's enemies during a war? What if they decided to leave and take their skills with them? His fear turned into action. Chapter 1, verse 10 records his worried thoughts. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous, and if war breaks out, we'll join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country. This Pharaoh didn't remember how Joseph had saved Egypt from 7 years of famine. He didn't care that the Israelites had been peaceful neighbors for generations. All he could see was a potential threat growing stronger every day. His advisors probably whispered in his ear about the dangers of having such a large foreign population in their land. Fear makes people do terrible things. Pharaoh's solution was simple but cruel: turn the Israelites into slaves. He appointed slave masters over them and gave them back-breaking work. They built entire cities for Pharaoh, including Pithom and Ramesses. The work was hard, the hours were long, and the treatment was harsh. Chapter 1, verse 11 tells us they put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor. The Egyptians made their lives bitter with harsh labor in brick and mortar and with all kinds of work in the fields. But something amazing happened. The harder the Egyptians worked them, the more the Israelites multiplied. Chapter 1, verse 12 shows this supernatural phenomenon. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread, so the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites. God's blessing on his people couldn't be stopped by human cruelty. This made Pharaoh even more afraid. He decided to get creative with his cruelty. Chapter 1, verse 16 shows his next evil plan. He told the Hebrew midwives, "When you are helping the Hebrew women during childbirth on the delivery stool, if you see that the baby is a boy, kill him, but if it is a girl, let her live." He wanted to wipe out an entire generation of Hebrew boys before they could even walk. But God had other plans. 2 Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, chose to fear God more than Pharaoh. They refused to kill the babies. When Pharaoh questioned them, they gave him a clever excuse found in chapter 1, verse 19. Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They are vigorous and give birth before the midwives arrive. God blessed these brave women for their courage. These women understood something important. There are times when obeying God means disobeying human authority. They risked their lives to save innocent babies. Chapter 1 verse 20 shows how God rewarded their faithfulness. So God was kind to the midwives, and the people increased and became even more numerous. Not only did God protect them, but he continued to bless the Israelites with even more children. Pharaoh's frustration grew. He made his final desperate command in chapter 1 verse 22. Every Hebrew boy that is born you must throw into the Nile, but let every girl live. This was genocide, the planned destruction of an entire people. Pharaoh had escalated from forced labor to systematic murder. Every Egyptian citizen was now commanded to become part of this horrible plan. Right in the middle of this horror, a baby was born who would change everything. Chapter 2 verse 2 tells us about this special child. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. This baby was Moses, though we don't learn his name yet. There was something special about this child that made his parents willing to risk everything to keep him alive. The parents belonged to the tribe of Levi, and they had faith that God would protect their son. For 3 months, they managed to keep the baby hidden. But babies grow, and they get louder. Eventually, hiding became impossible. They had to make the hardest decision any parent could face. His mother couldn't hide him anymore. Listen to her desperate plan in chapter 2 verse 3. But when she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with tar and pitch. Then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. She was following Pharaoh's command technically. She was putting her son in the Nile, but she was also trying to save his life. This wasn't just throwing a baby into the river. She carefully waterproofed the basket with tar and pitch, just like Noah had done with the ark. She placed it strategically among the reeds, where it would be protected, but also visible to the right person. Moses' mother was taking a calculated risk based on faith in God's protection. God had arranged for the right person to be in the right place at the right time. Chapter 2 verse 5 shows us the miracle. Then Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants were walking along the riverbank. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her female slave to get it. The very daughter of the man trying to kill Hebrew babies found this Hebrew baby. When she opened the basket, the baby was crying. Something touched her heart. Chapter 2 verse 6 tells us she felt sorry for him. "This is one of the Hebrew babies," she said. Even though she knew this child was supposed to die by her father's command, she chose mercy over law. Moses' sister Miriam, who had been watching from nearby, quickly offered to find a Hebrew woman to nurse the baby. The princess agreed, and amazingly, Moses' own mother became his paid nurse. Chapter 2 verse 10 shows how Moses got his name. When the child grew older, she took him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, saying, "I drew him out of the water." The name Moses means drawn out, and it would prove to be prophetic. This child who was drawn out of water would one day draw his entire nation out of slavery. Moses grew up in Pharaoh's palace, but he never forgot his true identity. Chapter 2 verse 11 shows us a moment that changed his life. One day, after Moses had grown up, he went out to where his own people were and watched them at their hard labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. The sight of injustice stirred something deep inside him. Moses looked around to make sure no one was watching, then killed the Egyptian and hid his body in the sand. But secrets have a way of coming out. The next day, when Moses tried to break up a fight between two Hebrews, one of them challenged him with the words found in chapter 2, verse 14. "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian?" Moses realized his secret was out. When Pharaoh heard about the murder, he tried to kill Moses. But Moses ran away to the land of Midian, where he married a woman named Zipporah and became a shepherd. For 40 years, he lived a quiet life, far from the palace and the problems of Egypt. He probably thought his days of trying to help his people were over, but God was just getting started. Chapter 3, verse 1 sets the scene for one of the most important moments in history. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. It was just another ordinary day of shepherding until Moses saw something that shouldn't have been possible. Chapter 3, verse 2 describes the miracle. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up, fire that didn't destroy. This was clearly supernatural. Moses' curiosity got the better of him, and he decided to investigate. As he got closer, God spoke to him. The voice from the bush gave him a command in chapter 3, verse 5. Do not come any closer. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Moses was standing before the God of his fathers, and he was terrified. He hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. Then God revealed his mission. Chapter 3, verse 7 contains God's heart for his people. I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. God had been watching and listening. All along, he was ready to act, and he wanted Moses to be his instrument of deliverance. Moses' response wasn't what you might expect from a hero. Instead of jumping at the chance to save his people, he started making excuses. His first objection came in chapter 3, verse 11. Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? Moses felt completely inadequate for such a huge task. God's answer was simple but powerful, found in chapter 3, verse 12. I will be with you, and this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. God wasn't asking Moses to do this alone. He would be right there with him every step of the way. But Moses wasn't convinced. He had another worry in chapter 3, verse 13. Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? Then what shall I tell them? Moses wanted to know exactly who was sending him on this impossible mission. God's answer revealed his eternal nature. Chapter 3, verse 14 contains one of the most important statements in all of Scripture. God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. This wasn't just a name. It was a declaration of God's eternal, unchanging existence. Moses still wasn't ready to say yes. In chapter 4, verse 1, he voiced another fear. What if they do not believe me or listen to me and say, the Lord did not appear to you? Moses was worried about credibility. How could he prove that God had really spoken to him? God gave Moses 3 miraculous signs to convince the people. First, his staff would turn into a snake and back again. Second, his hand would become leprous and then be healed. Third, if they still didn't believe, he could turn Nile water into blood. These weren't just tricks. They were supernatural proofs of God's power. Even with these amazing signs, Moses tried one more excuse. Chapter 4, verse 10 shows his final objection. Pardon your servant, Lord. I have never been eloquent, neither in the past, nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue. Moses was convinced he wasn't a good enough speaker for such an important job. God's patience was remarkable, but his answer was firm. Chapter 4, verse 11 reminds Moses of a basic truth. Who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? The God who created mouths could certainly help Moses know what to say. God's patience had limits. When Moses suggested in chapter 4, verse 13, that God should send someone else, the Lord became angry, but even in his anger, God provided a solution. He told Moses that his brother Aaron was already on his way to meet him, and Aaron would be Moses' spokesman. The reunion between the brothers after 40 years was emotional. Chapter 4, verse 27 tells us, "The Lord said to Aaron, 'Go into the wilderness to meet Moses.' So he met Moses at the mountain of God and kissed him." Aaron had no idea what God had planned, but he was about to become part of the greatest rescue mission in history. Moses told Aaron everything God had said and showed him the miraculous signs. Together, they traveled to Egypt to begin their mission. Chapter 4, verse 29 describes their first step. Moses and Aaron brought together all the elders of the Israelites. These were the leaders of the Hebrew people, and they needed to be convinced. First, Aaron spoke for Moses, telling the elders everything God had said. Then Moses performed the signs God had given him. Chapter 4, verse 31 shows the people's response, and they believed. And when they heard that the Lord was concerned about them and had seen their misery, they bowed down and worshipped. The people were ready. Now came the hard part. Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh with a simple request found in chapter 5, verse 1. "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says, 'Let my people go, so that they may hold a festival to me in the wilderness.'" They weren't asking for permanent freedom yet, just a 3-day religious celebration. Pharaoh's response was exactly what you'd expect from someone who thought he was a god himself. Chapter 5, verse 2 records his arrogant reply, "Who is the Lord, that I should obey him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go." Pharaoh had just declared war on the God of Israel. Moses and Aaron tried to reason with him, explaining in chapter 5, verse 3 that the God of the Hebrews has met with us. Now let us take a 3-day journey into the wilderness to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God, or he may strike us with plagues or with the sword. They were trying to warn Pharaoh about what might happen if he refused. But Pharaoh wasn't interested in warnings. Instead, he made life harder for the Israelites. Chapter 5, verse 7 shows his cruel response. "You are no longer to supply the people with straw for making bricks. Let them go and gather their own straw." The Israelites had to work just as hard, but now had to find their own materials too. The Israelite foremen were furious. They had been beaten because they couldn't meet their impossible quotas. Chapter 5, verse 21 shows their anger toward Moses and Aaron. "May the Lord look on you and judge you. You have made us obnoxious to Pharaoh and his officials and have put a sword in their hand to kill us." The rescue mission seemed to be making things worse, not better. Moses was devastated. He went back to God with his complaint in chapter 5. Verse 22, "Why, Lord, why have you brought trouble on this people? Is this why you sent me? Ever since I went to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has brought trouble on this people, and you have not rescued your people at all." Moses felt like a failure. God's response in chapter 6 revealed his bigger plan. Chapter 6, verse 1 contains a promise that would change everything. "Now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. Because of my mighty hand he will let them go. Because of my mighty hand he will drive them out of his country." God was about to demonstrate his power in ways that would shock the world. Then God reminded Moses of his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Chapter 6, verse 4 shows the scope of God's promise. "I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, where they resided as foreigners." This wasn't just about freedom from slavery. This was about fulfilling promises made centuries earlier. God revealed more of his character to Moses. Chapter 6, verse 6 contains multiple promises. "Therefore, say to the Israelites, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. I will free you from being slaves to them, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with mighty acts of judgment." God was about to show everyone exactly who he was, but the people had lost hope. Chapter 6 verse 9 shows their discouragement. Moses reported this to the Israelites, but they did not listen to him because of their discouragement and harsh labor. Sometimes people are too tired and hurt to believe in good news. God told Moses to go back to Pharaoh again, but Moses had his own doubts. Chapter 6 verse 12 shows his reasoning. If the Israelites will not listen to me, why would Pharaoh listen to me, since I speak with faltering lips? Moses was still worried about his speaking ability. God's answer was to give Moses and Aaron a clear command found in chapter 6, verse 13. Now the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron about the Israelites and Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he commanded them to bring the Israelites out of Egypt. There was no room for doubt. This was a direct order from God. Moses was 80 years old, and Aaron was 83 when they stood before Pharaoh the second time. Chapter 7 verse 1 reveals God's strategy. Then the Lord said to Moses, "See, I have made you like God to Pharaoh, and your brother Aaron will be your prophet." Moses would represent God's authority, and Aaron would be his spokesman. God made it clear that this wouldn't be easy. Chapter 7 verse 3 contains both a warning and a promise. But I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and though I multiply my signs and wonders in Egypt, he will not listen to you. God was going to use Pharaoh's stubborn heart to display his power to the world. When Moses and Aaron appeared before Pharaoh again, he demanded proof of their divine authority. Chapter 7 verse 9 shows he wanted to see a miracle. When Pharaoh says to you, "Perform a miracle," then say to Aaron, "Take your staff and throw it down before Pharaoh, and it will become a snake." God was ready to provide the proof. Aaron threw down his staff, and it became a snake, but Pharaoh wasn't impressed. Chapter 7 verse 11 tells us he summoned wise men and sorcerers, and the Egyptian magicians also did the same things by their secret arts. Egypt had its own version of supernatural power, and they seemed to match God's miracle. But God's power was superior. Chapter 7 verse 12 shows the outcome. Each one threw down his staff, and it became a snake. But Aaron's staff swallowed up their staffs. God's snake ate the magician's snakes, proving that his power was greater than theirs. Still, Pharaoh refused to listen. Chapter 7 verse 13 tells us, "Yet Pharaoh's heart became hard, and he would not listen to them, just as the Lord had said." The contest between God and Pharaoh was just beginning. God told Moses to meet Pharaoh by the Nile River the next morning. Chapter 7 verse 17 contains the warning for the first plague. This is what the Lord says, "By this you will know that I am the Lord. With the staff that is in my hand, I will strike the water of the Nile, and it will be changed into blood." The Nile was sacred to the Egyptians. God was about to attack their most important resource. Aaron stretched out his staff over the waters of Egypt, and everything changed. Chapter 7 verse 20 describes the miracle. Moses and Aaron did just as the Lord had commanded. He raised his staff in the presence of Pharaoh and his officials and struck the water of the Nile, and all the water was changed into blood. The river that gave life to Egypt became a source of death. The blood plague was devastating. Chapter 7 verse 21 shows the complete scope. The fish in the Nile died, and the river smelled so bad that the Egyptians could not drink its water. Blood was everywhere in Egypt. The entire water system of Egypt was contaminated, but again, Pharaoh's magicians seemed to match the miracle. Chapter 7 verse 22 tells us, "The Egyptian magicians did the same things by their secret arts, and Pharaoh's heart became hard. He would not listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord had said." Pharaoh used this as an excuse to ignore God's power. The Egyptians had to dig along the Nile for drinking water. For 7 days, they lived with the consequences of Pharaoh's hard heart. Then God sent Moses back with a new warning about frogs. Chapter 8 verse 2 contains God's second ultimatum. "If you refuse to let them go, I will send a plague of frogs on your whole country." This wasn't going to be a few frogs by the river. This was going to be an invasion. When Pharaoh refused again, Aaron stretched out his staff over the waters. Chapter 8, verse 3 describes what happened. So Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land. Frogs were everywhere, in houses, bedrooms, beds, ovens, and kneading troughs. Once again, the magicians duplicated the miracle. Chapter 8, verse 7 tells us, the magicians did the same. Things by their secret arts. They also made frogs come up on the land of Egypt. But making more frogs wasn't helpful when the country was already overrun with them. This time, Pharaoh seemed to crack under the pressure. Chapter 8, verse 8 shows his desperate plea. Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, "Pray to the Lord to take the frogs away from me and my people, and I will let your people go to offer sacrifices to the Lord." He was ready to negotiate. Moses gave Pharaoh the honor of choosing when the frogs would die. Chapter 8, verse 10 shows Pharaoh's response, "Tomorrow," and Moses agreed. The next day, all the frogs died, and the Egyptians piled them into heaps. The land stank from all the dead frogs. But as soon as the crisis passed, Pharaoh changed his mind again. Chapter 8, verse 15 tells us, when Pharaoh saw that there was relief, he hardened his heart and would not listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord had said. Pharaoh's pattern of promising and then breaking his word had begun. God's patience was wearing thin. Without any warning to Pharaoh, he told Aaron to strike the dust of the ground. Chapter 8, verse 17 shows the result. They did this, and when Aaron stretched out his hand with the staff and struck the dust of the ground, gnats came on people and animals. All the dust throughout the land of Egypt became gnats. This plague was immediate and unavoidable. This time, something different happened. Chapter 8, verse 18 tells us, the magicians tried to produce gnats by their secret arts, but they could not. For the first time, Egypt's magicians met a miracle they couldn't duplicate. They had to admit defeat. The magician's confession in chapter 8, verse 19 was significant. The magicians said to Pharaoh, "This is the finger of God." Even Egypt's spiritual leaders recognized that they were facing divine power beyond their ability to match or understand. But Pharaoh's heart remained hard. God wasn't finished showing Egypt who was really in charge. Chapter 8, verse 20 shows the next warning. Get up early in the morning and confront Pharaoh as he goes to the river and say to him, "This is what the Lord says. Let my people go so that they may worship me." This time, God was going to make a clear distinction. Chapter 8, verse 21 contains a promise that would change everything. "If you do not let my people go, I will send swarms of flies on you and your officials, on your people, and into your houses." But then came the game-changing part. Chapter 8, verse 22 shows God's protection plan. "But on that day, I will deal differently with the land of Goshen, where my people live. No swarms of flies will be there." When Pharaoh refused again, the flies came exactly as God had promised. Chapter 8, verse 24 describes the invasion, "And the Lord did this. Dense swarms of flies poured into Pharaoh's palace and into the houses of his officials. Throughout Egypt the land was ruined by the flies, but in Goshen, where the Israelites lived, there wasn't a single fly." Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron and offered a compromise. Chapter 8, verse 25 shows his first attempt at negotiation. "Go, sacrifice to your God here in the land." But Moses refused this compromise, knowing that Egyptian worship and Hebrew worship couldn't mix. Chapter 8, verse 26 shows Moses' reasoning. That would not be right. The sacrifices we offer the Lord our God would be detestable to the Egyptians. And if we offer sacrifices that are detestable in their eyes, will they not stone us? Moses knew that true worship required complete separation from Egyptian influence. Pharaoh agreed to let them go, but only if Moses would pray for the flies to be removed. Moses prayed, and God removed every single fly. But once again, chapter 8 verse 32 shows Pharaoh's broken promise, but this time also Pharaoh hardened his heart and would not let the people go. The fifth plague struck without warning. Chapter 9 verse 3 describes God's judgment on Egypt's livestock. The hand of the Lord will bring a terrible plague on your livestock in the field, on your horses, donkeys, and camels, and on your cattle, flocks, and herds. This plague would hit Egypt's economy hard. Chapter 9 verse 6 shows the complete devastation, and the next day the Lord did it. All the livestock of the Egyptians died, but not one animal belonging to the Israelites died. Pharaoh even sent people to check on the Israelite animals, and they found that God's word was true, yet his heart remained hard. The sixth plague came without any warning. Chapter 9 verse 8 shows God's instructions to Moses. Take handfuls of soot from a furnace and have Moses toss it into the air in the presence of Pharaoh. This simple act would bring painful boils on every person and animal in Egypt. Chapter 9 verse 10 describes what happened. So they took soot from a furnace and stood before Pharaoh. Moses tossed it into the air, and festering boils broke out on people and animals. The pain was so severe that even the magicians couldn't stand before Moses because of their boils. God gave Pharaoh one more chance before unleashing the seventh plague. Chapter 9 verse 13 shows Moses delivering God's most serious warning yet. Get up early in the morning, confront Pharaoh, and say to him, "This is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, says. Let my people go, so that they may worship me." Chapter 9 verse 16 contains God's purpose statement. But I have raised you up for this very purpose, that I might show you my power, and that my name might be proclaimed in all the earth. God wasn't just rescuing Israel. He was demonstrating his supremacy to the entire world. The warning for the seventh plague was specific and terrifying. Chapter 9 verse 18 describes what was coming. Therefore, at this time tomorrow I will send the worst hailstorm that has ever fallen on Egypt from the day it was founded till now. God even gave the Egyptians a chance to protect themselves. Some Egyptians were starting to fear God's word. Chapter 9 verse 20 shows this growing respect. Those officials of Pharaoh who feared the word of the Lord hurried to bring their slaves and their livestock inside. But others ignored the warning and left their servants and animals in the fields. When the hail came, it was unlike anything Egypt had ever seen. Chapter 9 verse 23 describes the supernatural storm. When Moses stretched out his staff toward the sky, the Lord sent thunder and hail, and lightning flashed down to the ground. The hail was mixed with fire. Chapter 9 verse 25 shows the complete devastation. Throughout Egypt, hail struck everything in the fields, both people and animals. It beat down everything growing in the fields and stripped every tree. Only in Goshen, where the Israelites lived, was there no hail. This time Pharaoh seemed genuinely shaken. Chapter 9 verse 27 records his confession. Then Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron. "This time I have sinned," he said. "The Lord is in the right, and I and my people are in the wrong." For the first time, Pharaoh admitted that he was fighting against God. Sure enough, as soon as the hail stopped, Pharaoh changed his mind again. Chapter 9 verse 34 shows his predictable response. When Pharaoh saw that the rain and hail and thunder had stopped, he sinned again. He and his officials hardened their hearts. God sent Moses back with a new warning about locusts. Chapter 10 verse 4 describes the eighth plague. "If you refuse to let them go, I will bring locusts into your country tomorrow." These wouldn't be ordinary locusts. They would eat everything the hail had left behind. Even Pharaoh's own officials were getting scared. Chapter 10 verse 7 shows their desperate plea. "How long will this man be a snare to us? Let the people go so that they may worship the Lord their God. Do you not yet realize that Egypt is ruined?" When Pharaoh refused to let everyone go, God sent the locusts. Chapter 10, verse 13 describes their arrival. So Moses stretched out his staff over Egypt, and the Lord made an east wind blow across the land all that day and all that night. By morning, the wind had brought the locusts. Chapter 10, verse 15 shows the complete destruction. They covered all the ground until it was black. They devoured all that was left after the hail, everything growing in the fields and the fruit on the trees. Nothing green remained on tree or plant in all the land of Egypt. Once again, Pharaoh begged Moses to pray for relief. Chapter 10, verse 17 shows his desperate words. Now forgive my sin once more, and pray to the Lord your God to take this deadly plague away from me. Moses prayed, and God sent a strong west wind that carried all the locusts into the Red Sea. But Pharaoh's heart remained unchanged. Chapter 10, verse 20 tells the familiar story. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let the Israelites go. Egypt was in ruins, but Pharaoh still wouldn't surrender to God's will. The 9th plague came without warning. Chapter 10, verse 21 shows God's simple command. Stretch out your hand toward the sky so that darkness may spread over Egypt, darkness that can be felt. This wasn't ordinary darkness. It was supernatural and thick. Chapter 10, verse 22 describes this terrifying plague. So Moses stretched out his hand toward the sky, and total darkness covered all Egypt for 3 days. People couldn't see each other or move around. But chapter 10, verse 23 shows God's continued protection. Yet all the Israelites had light in the places where they lived. After 3 days of supernatural darkness, Pharaoh called Moses one more time. Chapter 10, verse 24 shows his final compromise offer. Go, worship the Lord. Even your women and children may go with you. Only leave your flocks and herds behind. Pharaoh was willing to let the people go, but he wanted to keep their wealth. Moses refused this compromise too. Chapter 10, verse 26 shows his firm response. Our livestock too must go with us. Not a hoof is to be left behind. We have to use some of them in worshipping the Lord our God, and until we get there, we will not know what we are to use to worship the Lord. Pharaoh's anger finally exploded. Chapter 10, verse 28 shows his rage. Get out of my sight, make sure. You do not appear before me again. The day you see my face, you will die. Pharaoh was cutting off all communication and threatening Moses' life. Moses accepted this challenge with a warning of his own. Chapter 10, verse 29 contains his final words to Pharaoh. Just as you say, I will never appear before you again. This was the end of their negotiations. The next time they met, it would be in very different circumstances, but God wasn't finished with his warnings. Chapter 11, verse 1 shows God preparing Moses for the final plague. I will bring one more plague on Pharaoh and on Egypt. After that, he will let you go from here, and when he does, he will drive you out completely. God gave Moses specific instructions about asking the Egyptians for gold and silver. Chapter 11, verse 2 shows this unusual command. Tell the people that men and women alike are to ask their neighbors for articles of silver and gold. After all the plagues, the Egyptians would be willing to give the Israelites anything. Chapter 11, verse 3 shows how the Egyptians' attitude toward Moses had changed. The Lord made the Egyptians favorably disposed toward the people, and Moses himself was highly regarded in Egypt by Pharaoh's officials and by the people. The man Pharaoh wanted to kill was now respected throughout Egypt. Moses delivered God's final warning to Pharaoh. Chapter 11, verse 4 contains the announcement of the 10th plague. This is what the Lord says. About midnight I will go throughout Egypt. This plague would be different from all the others. It would strike at the heart of every Egyptian family. Chapter 11, verse 5 describes the scope of this final judgment. Every firstborn son in Egypt will die, from the firstborn son of Pharaoh, who sits on the throne, to the firstborn son of the female slave, who is at her hand mill, and all the firstborn of the cattle as well. But God promised that his people would be completely protected. Chapter 11, verse 7 shows the clear distinction. But among the Israelites, not a dog will bark at any person or animal. Then you will know that the Lord makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel. Moses warned Pharaoh that this plague would bring complete surrender. Chapter 11, verse 8 contains his final prophecy. All these officials of yours will come to me, bowing down before me and saying, "Go, you and all the people who follow you." After that, I will leave. Before the final plague struck, God gave Moses detailed instructions for a ceremony that would protect the Israelites and become a permanent reminder of their rescue. Chapter 12, verse 1 shows the importance of this moment. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in Egypt, "This month is to be for you the first month of your year." Chapter 12, verse 3 contains God's specific instructions. Tell the whole community of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, each man is to take a lamb for his family, one for each household. This wasn't just any lamb, it had to meet God's exact requirements. The lamb had to be perfect, without any defects. Chapter 12, verse 5 shows these requirements. The animals you choose must be year-old males without defect, and you may take them from the sheep or the goats. These lambs would take the place of the firstborn sons who were about to die in Egypt. The innocent would die for the guilty. The families had to care for these lambs for 4 days. Then came the crucial moment. Chapter 12, verse 6 gives the timing. Take care of them until the 14th day of the month, when all the members of the community of Israel must slaughter them at twilight. Every Israelite family would kill their lamb at exactly the same time. The blood was the most important part. Chapter 12, verse 7 shows what they had to do. Then they are to take some of the blood and put it on the sides and tops of the doorframes of the houses where they eat the lambs. The blood would mark which houses belonged to God's people. God explained exactly how to prepare and eat the lamb. Chapter 12, verse 8 gives the instructions. That same night they are to eat the meat roasted over the fire, along with bitter herbs and bread made without yeast. Nothing could be left until morning. It all had to be consumed that night. Chapter 12, verse 11 shows how they were supposed to eat this meal. This is how you are to eat it, with your cloak tucked into your belt, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. Eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. They had to be ready to leave Egypt immediately after the meal. God revealed the purpose of the blood on the doorframes. Chapter 12, verse 12 explains what would happen that night. On that same night, I will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn of both people and animals, and I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. Chapter 12, verse 13 contains the promise that would save Israel's children. The blood will be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and when I see the blood, I will pass over you. No destructive plague will touch you when I strike Egypt. The blood of the lamb would be the difference between life and death. The Passover night changed everything. Chapter 12, verse 29 describes what happened at midnight. At midnight the Lord struck down all the firstborn in Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh, who sat on the throne, to the firstborn of the prisoner, who was in the dungeon, and the firstborn of all the livestock as well. Chapter 12, verse 30 shows the immediate result. Pharaoh and all his officials and all the Egyptians got up during the night, and there was loud wailing in Egypt, for there was not a house without someone dead. The cry of grief that went up from Egypt was unlike anything they had ever experienced. Pharaoh's resistance finally broke completely. Chapter 12, verse 31 shows his desperate surrender. During the night, Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, "Up, leave my people, you and the Israelites. Go, worship the Lord as you have requested." The proud king who had said, "I do not know the Lord," was now begging God's servants to leave. Chapter 12, verse 32 shows how completely Pharaoh had given up. "Take your flocks and herds, as you have said, and go, and also bless me." The man who had threatened to kill Moses was now asking for Moses' blessing. Fear had completely replaced pride. The Egyptians were so eager to see the Israelites leave that they gave them whatever they asked for. Chapter 12, verse 35 describes this amazing turnaround. The Israelites did as Moses instructed and asked the Egyptians for articles of silver and gold and for clothing. After years of forced labor, the slaves were becoming wealthy. Chapter 12, verse 36 shows God's justice in action. The Lord had made the Egyptians favorably disposed toward the people, and they gave them what they asked for, so they plundered the Egyptians. Egypt was paying back wages for centuries of slave labor. The Israelites left Egypt that very night. Chapter 12, verse 37 gives us the incredible numbers. The Israelites journeyed from Ramesses to Sukkoth. There were about 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children. Including families, there were probably over 2 million people leaving Egypt at once. Chapter 12, verse 41 shows the exact timing of their departure. At the end of the 430 years, to the very day, all the Lord's divisions left Egypt. God's timing was perfect. They left exactly when he had promised Abraham centuries earlier, but freedom came with new responsibilities. Chapter 13, verse 1 shows God's first command to the free nation. The Lord said to Moses, "Consecrate to me every firstborn, male. The first offspring of every womb among the Israelites belongs to me, whether human or animal." The firstborn who had been saved by the Passover lamb now belonged to God. Moses explained this law to the people as they traveled. Chapter 13, verse 8 shows how they were to teach their children. "On that day, tell your son, I do this because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt." Every generation needed to know the story of their rescue. God personally led them on their journey. Chapter 13, verse 21 describes his visible presence. "By day the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they could travel by day or night." God wasn't sending them away. He was going with them. God led the Israelites on a route that seemed to make no sense. Chapter 14, verse 1 shows his surprising direction. "Tell the Israelites to turn back and encamp near Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the Yim Sea. They are to encamp by the sea directly opposite Baal-zephon." Instead of heading straight to Canaan, God led them toward the Red Sea. Chapter 14, verse 3 reveals God's strategy. Pharaoh will think the Israelites are wandering around the land in confusion, hemmed in by the desert. God was setting a trap, and Pharaoh was about to walk right into it. When Pharaoh heard where the Israelites were camped, his attitude changed completely. Chapter 14, verse 5 shows his regret. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his officials changed their minds about them and said, "What have we done? We have let the Israelites go and have lost their services." Chapter 14, verse 6 describes Pharaoh's military preparation. "So he had his chariot made ready and took his army with him." This wasn't just a few soldiers. Pharaoh was bringing his entire military force to recapture the Israelites. Chapter 14, verse 7 shows the size of Egypt's army. He took 600 of the best chariots, along with all the other chariots of Egypt, with officers over all of them. Egypt's most elite military units were pursuing the escaped slaves. When the Israelites saw the Egyptian army approaching, they panicked. Chapter 14, verse 10 describes their terror. As Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. They were terrified and cried out to the Lord. Their panic turned to anger against Moses. Chapter 14, verse 11 shows their bitter complaint. They said to Moses, Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt?" Moses responded with incredible faith and calm. Chapter 14, verse 13 contains his reassuring words. Moses answered the people, "Do not be afraid, stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again." Chapter 14, verse 14 shows Moses' confidence in God's power. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. The battle belonged to God, not to them. They didn't need to fight. They just needed to watch God work. God told Moses exactly what to do. Chapter 14, verse 16 contains the incredible command, "Raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea to divide the water so that the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground." God was about to do something that had never been done before. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the impossible happened. Chapter 14, verse 21 describes the miracle. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and all that night the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind and turned it into dry land. The waters were divided. Chapter 14, verse 22 shows the result. And the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with a wall of water on their right and on their left. 2 million people walked across the bottom of the sea with walls of water held back by God's power. The Egyptians, blinded by their hatred and greed, charged into the sea after the Israelites. Chapter 14, verse 23 describes their pursuit. The Egyptians pursued them, and all Pharaoh's horses and chariots and horsemen followed them into the sea. Egypt's entire military force entered the path that God had created for his people, but God wasn't finished with his miracle. Chapter 14, verse 24 shows what happened at dawn. During the last watch of the night, the Lord looked down from the pillar of fire and cloud at the Egyptian army and threw it into confusion. God's presence brought panic to Egypt's supposedly invincible army. Chapter 14, verse 25 describes the chaos. He jammed the wheels of their chariots so that they had difficulty driving. And the Egyptians said, "Let's get away from the Israelites. The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt." Egypt's soldiers finally understood that they were fighting against God himself. When all the Israelites had safely crossed to the other side, God told Moses to stretch out his hand again. Chapter 14, verse 26 contains the final command. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea so that the waters may flow back over the Egyptians and their chariots and horsemen." Chapter 14, verse 27 describes the complete destruction. Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at daybreak, the sea went back to its place. The Egyptians were fleeing toward it, and the Lord swept them into the sea. The entire Egyptian army was swallowed by the waters. Chapter 14, verse 28 shows the totality of God's victory. The water flowed back and covered the chariots and horsemen, the entire army of Pharaoh that had followed the Israelites into the sea. Not one of them survived. The most powerful military in the world was completely destroyed in a single moment. When the Israelites saw their enemies dead on the shore, their fear turned to worship. Chapter 14, verse 31 describes their response. And when the Israelites saw the mighty hand of the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and put their trust in him and in Moses, his servant. This victory demanded a song of celebration. Chapter 15, verse 1 shows Moses leading the nation in worship. Then Moses and the Israelites sang this song to the Lord. "I will sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. Both horse and driver he has hurled into the sea." Chapter 15, verse 2 contains Israel's declaration of faith. "The Lord is my strength and my defense. He has become my salvation. He is my God, and I will praise him, my father's God, and I will exalt him." The God of their ancestors had proven that he was still the same powerful deliverer. The song celebrated God as a warrior. Chapter 15, verse 3 proclaims, "The Lord is a warrior, the Lord is his name." This wasn't the image of God that Egypt expected. Their gods were distant and weak, but Israel's God fought for his people. Chapter 15, verse 6 praises God's incredible power. "Your right hand, Lord, was majestic in power. Your right hand, Lord, shattered the enemy." The same hand that had created the world had just destroyed Egypt's army. Chapter 15, verse 18 ends with a declaration of God's eternal reign. The Lord reigns forever and ever. This victory wasn't just about escaping Egypt, it was about establishing God's kingdom on earth. Miriam, Moses' sister, led the women in their own celebration. Chapter 15, verse 20 shows her leadership. Then Miriam the prophet, Aaron's sister, took a timbrel in her hand, and all the women followed her with timbrels and dancing. Chapter 15, verse 21 records Miriam's song. Miriam sang to them, "Sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. Both horse and driver he has hurled into the sea." The celebration continued as the people marveled at what God had done. After 3 days of traveling through the desert, reality set in. The celebration ended when they reached Marah and discovered a serious problem. Chapter 15, verse 23 describes their crisis. When they came to Marah, they could not drink its water because it was bitter. That is why the place is called Marah. The people's faith evaporated quickly. Chapter 15, verse 24 shows how fast their attitude changed. So the people grumbled against Moses, saying, "What are we to drink?" The same people who had just sung praises to God were now complaining against his servant. Moses didn't argue with the people. He went straight to God with the problem. Chapter 15, verse 25 shows his response. Then Moses cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood. He threw it into the water, and the water became fit to drink. At Marah, God gave them a promise with a condition. Chapter 15, verse 26 contains both elements. He said, "If you listen carefully to the Lord your God and do what is right in his eyes, if you pay attention to his commands and keep all his decrees, I will not bring on you any of the diseases I brought on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you." From Marah they traveled to Elim, where they found relief. Chapter 15, verse 27 describes this oasis. Then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs and 70 palm trees, and they camped there near the water. God provided exactly what they needed, abundant water and shade. But the relief at Elim was temporary. Chapter 16, verse 1 shows their continued journey. The whole Israelite community set out from Elim and came to the desert of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the 2nd month after they had come out of Egypt. Hunger became their new crisis. Chapter 16, verse 2 describes their complaint. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The pattern was repeating. When faced with difficulty, they blamed their leaders instead of trusting God. Chapter 16, verse 3 shows how quickly they forgot their slavery. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted, but you have brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death." God heard their complaints and responded with grace instead of judgment. Chapter 16, verse 4 contains his promise. Then the Lord said to Moses, "I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way I will test them and see whether they will follow my instructions." That evening, God sent quail to cover their camp. Chapter 16, verse 13 describes this provision. That evening quail came and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. God provided meat exactly as he had promised. When the dew evaporated, something amazing appeared on the ground. Chapter 16, verse 14, describes this new food. When the dew was gone, thin flakes like frost on the ground appeared on the desert floor. The Israelites had never seen anything like it before. Chapter 16, verse 15, shows their confusion. When the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, "It is the bread the Lord has given you to eat." This supernatural food would sustain them for the next 40 years. Moses gave them specific instructions about gathering this bread from heaven. Chapter 16, verse 16 contains God's rules. This is what the Lord has commanded. Everyone is to gather as much as they need. Take an omer for each person you have in your tent. God wanted them to trust Him for daily provision, not hoard for the future. The people called this supernatural food manna. Chapter 16, verse 31, describes what it was like. The people of Israel called the bread manna. It was white like coriander seed and tasted like wafers made with honey. God had given them food that was both nutritious and delicious. The journey continued, but the people's complaints didn't stop. They left the desert of Sin and set up camp at Rephidim, but there was no water for them to drink. Chapter 17, verse 1, shows their situation. The whole Israelite community set out from the desert of Sin, traveling from place to place as the Lord commanded. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. The lack of water quickly turned into another crisis. The same people who had just received manna from heaven were now angry about water. Chapter 17, verse 2 describes their confrontation with Moses. So they quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." Moses replied, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test?" But the people were desperate and thirsty. Their desperation made them forget all the miracles they had seen. Chapter 17, verse 3 shows how extreme their complaint became. But the people were thirsty for water there, and they grumbled against Moses. They said, "Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to make us and our children and livestock die of thirst?" Moses was getting overwhelmed by the constant complaints. He cried out to God for help, and his prayer in chapter 17, verse 4 shows his desperation. Then Moses cried out to the Lord, "What am I to do with these people? They are almost ready to stone me." The people were so angry they were ready to kill their leader. God had a solution that would demonstrate his power once again. Chapter 17, verse 5 contains his specific instructions. The Lord answered Moses, "Go out in front of the people. Take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go." Moses was to use the same staff that had brought plagues on Egypt. God told Moses exactly where to go and what to do. Chapter 17, verse 6 shows the amazing promise, "I will stand there before you by the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it for the people to drink." God himself would be present at this miracle, standing by the rock. Moses followed God's instructions exactly. He took the elders as witnesses and struck the rock with his staff. Water poured out of solid stone, enough for over 2 million people and their animals to drink. Chapter 17, verse 6 confirms the miracle. So Moses did this in the sight of the elders of Israel. Moses gave this place 2 names that reflected what had happened there. Chapter 17, verse 7 explains the significance. And he called the place Massah and Meribah because the Israelites quarreled and because they tested the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" These names meant testing and quarreling, reminding future generations of this moment of doubt. While Israel was still camped at Rephidim, they faced their first military attack since leaving Egypt. The Amalekites came and attacked the Israelites without warning. Chapter 17, verse 8 describes this unprovoked assault. The Amalekites came and attacked the Israelites at Rephidim. Moses immediately organized a defense, but he did something unusual. Instead of leading the battle himself, he sent Joshua while he went to a hilltop to pray. Chapter 17, verse 9 shows Moses' strategy. Moses said to Joshua, "Choose some of our men and go out to fight the Amalekites. Tomorrow I will take my position on top of the hill with the staff of God in my hands." The battle that followed revealed something amazing about the power of prayer. Chapter 17, verse 11 describes what happened. As long as Moses held up his hands, the Israelites were winning, but whenever he lowered his hands, the Amalekites were winning. The outcome of the physical battle depended on Moses' spiritual intercession. But Moses was human, and his arms got tired from holding them up all day. Chapter 17, verse 12 shows how Aaron and Hur helped him. Moses' hands grew tired, so they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. Aaron and Hur held his hands up, one on one side, one on the other, so that his hands remained steady until sunset. With Moses' hands supported in prayer, Joshua and his army were able to completely defeat the Amalekites. Chapter 17, verse 13, confirms the victory. So Joshua overcame the Amalekite army with the sword. This was Israel's first military victory, and it came through a combination of faithful fighting and faithful praying. God told Moses to write down what had happened as a permanent reminder. Chapter 17, verse 14 contains this important command. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Write this on a scroll as something to be remembered, and make sure that Joshua hears it, because I will completely blot out the name of Amalek from under heaven." This wasn't just a battle report. It was a prophecy of future judgment. Moses built an altar to commemorate God's help in this victory. Chapter 17, verse 15 shows his response. Moses built an altar and called it, "The Lord is my banner." The name reflected how God had given them victory, like a military banner leading them into battle. Chapter 17, verse 16 contains Moses' declaration about this ongoing conflict. He said, "Because hands were lifted up against the throne of the Lord will be at war against the Amalekites from generation to generation." This attack on God's people was an attack on God himself. News of Israel's miraculous escape from Egypt spread throughout the region. Moses' father-in-law Jethro heard about everything God had done and came to visit Moses in the wilderness. Chapter 18, verse 1 describes his arrival. Now Jethro, the priest of Midian and father-in-law of Moses, heard of everything God had done for Moses and for his people Israel, and how the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. Jethro brought Moses' wife Zipporah and their 2 sons, who had apparently been staying with him during the Exodus. Chapter 18, verse 2 shows this family reunion. After Moses had sent away his wife Zipporah, his father-in-law Jethro received her and her 2 sons. When Jethro arrived at the camp, Moses told him everything that had happened. Chapter 18, verse 8 describes their conversation. Moses told his father-in-law about everything the Lord had done to Pharaoh and the Egyptians for Israel's sake, and about all the hardships they had met along the way, and how the Lord had saved them. Jethro was amazed by what he heard and praised God for his mighty works. Chapter 18, verse 10 shows his response. He said, "Praise be to the Lord, who rescued you from the hand of the Egyptians and of Pharaoh, and who rescued the people from the hand of the Egyptians." Even this Midianite priest recognized the greatness of Israel's God. Chapter 18, verse 11 shows Jethro's growing understanding. "Now I know that the Lord is greater than all other gods, for he did this to those who had treated Israel arrogantly. The plagues had shown God's supremacy over all Egyptian deities." The next day, Jethro watched Moses work and saw a serious problem. Moses was trying to judge every dispute among 2 million people by himself. Chapter 18, verse 13 describes what Jethro observed. The next day, Moses took his seat to serve as judge for the people, and they stood around him from morning till evening. Jethro realized this system wouldn't work. Chapter 18, verse 17 shows his wise counsel. Moses' father-in-law replied, "What you are doing is not good. You and these people who come to you will only wear yourselves out. The work is too heavy for you. You cannot handle it alone." Jethro suggested a solution that would help Moses and serve the people better. Chapter 18, verse 21 contains his advice. "But select capable men from all the people, men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them as officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens." Moses listened to his father-in-law's wisdom and implemented the new system. Chapter 18, verse 24 shows Moses' humility. Moses listened to his father-in-law and did everything he said. Pride didn't prevent Moses from accepting good advice, even from someone outside Israel. 3 months after leaving Egypt, the Israelites arrived at Mount Sinai. Chapter 19, verse 1 marks this important moment. On the first day of the 3rd month, after the Israelites left Egypt, on that very day, they came to the desert of Sinai. This mountain would become the most important place in their journey. Chapter 19, verse 2 describes their arrival. After they set out from Rephidim, they entered the desert of Sinai, and Israel camped there in the desert in front of the mountain. The entire nation was gathered before the mountain where God would reveal himself in a new way. God called Moses up the mountain to give him a message for the people. Chapter 19, verse 3 shows this special summons. Then Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain and said, "This is what you are to say to the descendants of Jacob, and what you are to tell the people of Israel." God reminded Moses of what he had done for Israel and what he wanted their relationship to be. Chapter 19, verse 4 contains God's tender words. "You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself." God had rescued them not just from slavery, but for a special relationship with him. Chapter 19, verse 5 shows God's amazing offer to Israel. "Now if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." God was offering to make them his special people among all the nations of the earth. When Moses brought this message to the people, their response was immediate and unanimous. Chapter 19, verse 8 records their commitment. The people all responded together, "We will do everything the Lord has said." So Moses brought their answer back to the Lord. They agreed to the covenant without even knowing what it would require. God told Moses to prepare the people for a direct encounter with him. Chapter 19, verse 10 contains the preparation instructions. "And the Lord said to Moses, 'Go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow. Have them wash their clothes and be ready by the 3rd day, because on that day the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people.'" The mountain was to be treated as holy ground during God's visit. Chapter 19, verse 12 shows the strict boundaries. "Put limits for the people around the mountain and tell them, 'Be careful that you do not approach the mountain or touch the foot of it. Whoever touches the mountain is to be put to death.'" This wasn't a casual meeting. This was the holy God revealing himself to sinful people. On the 3rd day, God came down on Mount Sinai in a display of power that terrified the people. Chapter 19, verse 16 describes the awesome scene. "On the morning of the 3rd day there was thunder and lightning, with a thick cloud over the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast. Everyone in the camp trembled." Chapter 19, verse 18 shows the mountain itself responding to God's presence. Mount Sinai was covered with smoke because the Lord descended on it in fire. The smoke billowed up from it like smoke from a furnace, and the whole mountain trembled violently. The very earth shook when God came down. From this terrifying display of power, God spoke the Ten Commandments. Chapter 20, verse 1 introduces these fundamental laws. And God spoke all these words. These weren't suggestions or guidelines. These were direct commands from the Creator of the universe. Chapter 20, verse 3 contains the first commandment. You shall have no other gods before me. This established the foundation of all relationship with God. He alone was to be worshipped and obeyed. The second commandment prohibited making idols. Chapter 20, verse 4 states, You shall not make idols or any likeness of what is in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the water under the earth. God could not be represented by human-made objects. The third commandment protected God's name from misuse. Chapter 20, verse 7 declares, You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. God's name was to be treated with reverence and respect. After giving the Ten Commandments, God provided Moses with detailed civil laws to govern daily life in Israel. These laws would help them live together as God's people. Chapter 21, verse 1 introduces these regulations. These are the laws you are to set before them. The first laws dealt with Hebrew servants. Chapter 21, verse 2 shows God's concern for fair treatment. If you buy a Hebrew servant, he is to serve you for 6 years, but in the 7th year he shall go free without paying anything. Even servitude had limits. No Hebrew could be enslaved. Permanently, God made special provisions for servants who chose to stay with kind masters. Chapter 21, verse 5 describes this option. But if the servant declares, I love my master and my wife and children and do not want to go free, then his master must take him before the judges. Love, not force, could create a permanent relationship. Laws about violence showed God's concern for protecting the innocent. Chapter 21, verse 12 established a basic principle. Anyone who strikes a person with a fatal blow is to be put to death. Murder required the ultimate penalty because life was sacred, but God distinguished between intentional murder and accidental killing. Chapter 21, verse 13 shows his mercy. However, if it is not done intentionally, but God lets it happen, they are to flee to a place I will designate. Cities of refuge would protect those who killed accidentally. Special laws protected the most vulnerable members of society. Chapter 21, verse 17 shows the seriousness of dishonoring parents. Anyone who curses their father or mother is to be put to death. The family structure was fundamental to God's design for society. Laws about personal injury established the principle of proportional justice. Chapter 21, verse 24 contains the famous phrase, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand, foot for foot. Punishment should fit the crime, not exceed it or fall short of it. God's laws covered every aspect of life, including property rights and moral behavior. Chapter 22, verse 1 establishes the principle of restitution. Whoever steals an ox or a sheep and slaughters it or sells it must pay back 5 head of cattle for the ox and 4 sheep for the sheep. Thieves had to restore more than they stole. The laws protected people's right to defend their property. Chapter 22, verse 2 shows when force was justified. If a thief is caught breaking in at night and is struck a fatal blow, the defender is not guilty of bloodshed. People could protect their homes from intruders, but different rules applied in daylight when the threat was less severe. Chapter 22, verse 3 makes this distinction. But if it happens after sunrise, the defender is guilty of bloodshed. Anyone who steals must certainly make restitution, but if they have nothing, they must be sold to pay for their theft. Social responsibility was emphasized in laws about helping others. Chapter 22, verse 21 commands, Do not mistreat or oppress a foreigner, for you were foreigners in Egypt. Israel's own experience of oppression should make them compassionate to others. Special protection was given to widows and orphans. Chapter 22 verse 22 shows God's concern. Do not take advantage of the widow or the fatherless. Those without natural protectors were under God's special care. Money lending was regulated to prevent exploitation. Chapter 22 verse 25 prohibits usury. If you lend money to one of my people among you who is needy, do not treat it like a business deal. Charge no interest. Helping the poor shouldn't become a way to get rich. God prohibited consulting mediums and practicing witchcraft. Chapter 22 verse 18 states clearly, do not allow a sorceress to live. Any attempt to contact spiritual powers other than God was forbidden and punishable by death. God established 3 annual festivals that would mark Israel's religious calendar and strengthen their covenant relationship with Him. Chapter 23 verse 14 introduces these celebrations. 3 times a year you are to celebrate a festival to me. The first festival was the Festival of Unleavened Bread, commemorating their escape from Egypt. Chapter 23 verse 15 gives the details. Celebrate the Festival of Unleavened Bread. For 7 days eat bread made without yeast, as I commanded you. Do this at the appointed time in the month of Aviv, for in that month you came out of Egypt. The second festival celebrated the harvest of the first crops. Chapter 23 verse 16 describes the Festival of Harvest. Celebrate the Festival of Harvest with the first fruits of the crops you sow in your field. This would remind them that God provided their food. The third festival marked the end of the agricultural year. Chapter 23 verse 16 also mentions the Festival of Ingathering. Celebrate the Festival of Ingathering at the end of the year, when you gather in your crops from the field. This was a time of thanksgiving for God's provision throughout the year. God commanded that all males appear before Him during these festivals. Chapter 23 verse 17 states, 3 times a year all the men are to appear before the Sovereign Lord. These weren't optional celebrations, but required gatherings for worship. God promised to drive out the nations from the promised land gradually. Chapter 23 verse 29 shows His wisdom in this. But I will not drive them out in a single year, because the land would become desolate and the wild animals too numerous for you. The conquest would take time for practical reasons. Chapter 23 verse 30 explains God's timing. Little by little I will drive them out before you, until you have increased enough to take possession of the land. God's plan considered Israel's ability to settle and manage the territory. God warned Israel about the danger of compromise with pagan nations. Chapter 23 verse 32 contains a strict prohibition. Do not make a covenant with them or with their gods. Any agreement with idol-worshipping peoples would lead Israel away from God. The reason for this separation was spiritual protection. Chapter 23 verse 33 explains, do not let them live in your land, or they will cause you to sin against me, because the worship of their gods will certainly be a snare to you. Tolerance of false religion would become a trap. Moses came down from the mountain and told the people everything God had said. Their response was immediate and unanimous. Chapter 24 verse 3 records their commitment. When Moses went and told the people all the Lord's words and laws, they responded with one voice, everything the Lord has said we will do. Moses wrote down all of God's words to create a permanent record. Chapter 24 verse 4 shows his careful documentation. Moses then wrote down everything the Lord had said. He got up early the next morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain and set up 12 stone pillars representing the 12 tribes of Israel. The covenant ceremony involved young men making sacrifices. Chapter 24 verse 5 describes their role. Then he sent young Israelite men, and they offered burnt offerings and sacrificed young bulls as fellowship offerings to the Lord. These sacrifices would seal the agreement between God and his people. Moses divided the blood from the sacrifices into two parts for the ceremony. Chapter 24, verse 6 shows his preparation. Moses took half of the blood and put it in bowls, and the other half he splashed against the altar. The blood represented life and would bind both parties to keep the covenant. Moses read the entire covenant to the people one more time. Chapter 24, verse 7 records this final reading. Then he took the book of the covenant and read it to the people. They responded, "We will do everything the Lord has said. We will obey." Even after hearing all the requirements, they committed to obedience. The blood covenant was sealed when Moses sprinkled blood on the people. Chapter 24, verse 8 describes this solemn moment. Moses then took the blood, sprinkled it on the people and said, "This is the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you in accordance with all these words." The covenant was now officially in effect. Moses, Aaron, and 70 elders were invited up the mountain for a special meal in God's presence. Chapter 24, verse 9 describes this honor. Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and the 70 elders of Israel went up and saw the God of Israel. They actually saw God and lived to tell about it. Chapter 24, verse 11 shows the remarkable nature of this encounter. But God did not raise his hand against these leaders of the Israelites. They saw God and they ate and drank. In God's presence, they shared a covenant meal, celebrating their new relationship. God called Moses up the mountain alone for a longer stay. Chapter 24, verse 12 contains this special invitation. The Lord said to Moses, "Come up to me on the mountain and stay here, and I will give you the tablets of stone with the law and commandments I have written for their instruction." God would give Moses the law written by his own hand. Moses left Joshua partway up the mountain and continued alone to meet with God. Chapter 24, verse 13 shows Moses' obedience. Then Moses set out with Joshua, his aide, and Moses went up on the mountain of God. This would be the beginning of 40 days in God's presence. The people watched as God's glory covered the mountain like a cloud. Chapter 24, verse 15 describes what they saw. When Moses went up on the mountain, the cloud covered it. God's presence was visible to everyone in the camp. Chapter 24, verse 16 shows how long God's glory remained. And the glory of the Lord settled on Mount Sinai. For 6 days the cloud covered the mountain, and on the 7th day the Lord called to Moses from within the cloud. God's timing was deliberate. Even his calling of Moses followed the pattern of 6 days of waiting and action on the 7th. To the people watching from below, God's glory looked like consuming fire. Chapter 24, verse 17 describes their perspective. To the Israelites, the glory of the Lord looked like a consuming fire on top of the mountain. They could see that Moses was in the presence of awesome, overwhelming power. Moses entered the cloud and stayed on the mountain for 40 days and nights. Chapter 24, verse 18 concludes, "Then Moses entered the cloud as he went on up the mountain, and he stayed on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights." For more than a month, Moses would be alone with God, receiving detailed instructions for Israel's worship and life. While Moses was alone with God on Mount Sinai, the Lord began revealing his plans for a portable sanctuary where he would dwell among his people. Chapter 25, verse 8 shows God's heart behind this project. "Then have them make a sanctuary for me, and I will dwell among them." This wasn't just a building. It was God's way of staying close to Israel during their journey. God gave Moses incredibly detailed instructions for every part of this holy tent. Chapter 25, verse 9 emphasizes the importance of following the exact pattern. "Make this tabernacle and all its furnishings exactly like the pattern I will show you." Nothing could be left to human imagination or creativity. Everything had to match God's perfect design. The most sacred item would be the Ark of the Covenant, a wooden box covered with pure gold. Chapter 25 verse 10 gives the precise measurements. Have them make an ark of acacia wood, 2.5 cubits long, a cubit and a half wide, and a cubit and a half high. This chest would hold the stone tablets with the 10 commandments. The ark would have a special golden cover called the mercy seat, where God would meet with Moses. Chapter 25 verse 22 contains this amazing promise. There, above the cover between the 2 cherubim that are over the ark of the covenant law, I will meet with you and give you all my commands for the Israelites. God would literally come down to speak with his servant. Inside the tabernacle would be a golden table for bread and a 7-branched lampstand called the menorah. Chapter 25 verse 30 shows the purpose of the table. Put the bread of the presence on this table to be before me at all times. This bread would represent the 12 tribes of Israel, always in God's sight. The lampstand had to be made from one solid piece of pure gold with intricate decorative work. Chapter 25, verse 31, describes its beauty. Make a lampstand of pure gold, hammer out its base and shaft, and make its flower-like cups, buds, and blossoms of one piece with them. This golden menorah would provide the only light inside the holy place. The tabernacle itself would be made of fine curtains and coverings. Chapter 26, verse 1, describes the inner curtains. Make the tabernacle with 10 curtains of finely twisted linen and blue, purple, and scarlet yarn, with cherubim woven into them by a skilled worker. These beautiful curtains would create a holy space worthy of God's presence. The entire structure had to be portable, since Israel would be traveling through the wilderness for years. Chapter 26, verse 15, shows how the frame was designed. Make upright frames of acacia wood for the tabernacle. These wooden frames could be taken apart and reassembled whenever the camp moved. A thick curtain would separate the most holy place from the rest of the tabernacle. Chapter 26, verse 33 explains its purpose. Hang the curtain from the clasps and place the Ark of the Covenant law behind the curtain. The curtain will separate the holy place from the most holy place. Only the high priest could go behind this curtain, and only once a year, God chose Aaron and his sons to serve as priests, the only people allowed to offer sacrifices and enter the holy place. Chapter 28, verse 1 shows this divine selection. Have Aaron your brother brought to you from among the Israelites, along with his sons Nadab and Abihu, Eleazar and Ithamar, so they may serve me as priests. This wasn't a job they could apply for. It was a calling from God. The priests would wear special garments that reflected the glory and beauty of their sacred role. Chapter 28, verse 2 describes the purpose of these clothes. Make sacred garments for your brother Aaron, to give him dignity and honor. Every piece of clothing had spiritual significance and had to be made exactly according to God's instructions. The most important piece was the ephod, a sleeveless garment worn over the priest's robe. Chapter 28, verse 6 gives details about its construction. Make the ephod of gold and of blue, purple, and scarlet yarn and of finely twisted linen, the work of skilled hands. This wasn't ordinary clothing. It was a work of art created for worship. Attached to the ephod would be a breastpiece containing 12 precious stones, each representing one of the tribes of Israel. Chapter 28, verse 15 describes this sacred item. Fashion a breastpiece for making decisions, the work of skilled hands. Make it like the ephod, of gold and of blue, purple and scarlet yarn, and of finely twisted linen. When the high priest wore this, he literally carried all of Israel on his heart before God. Chapter 28, verse 21 shows how each tribe was represented. There are to be 12 stones, one for each of the names of the sons of Israel, each engraved like a seal with the name of one of the 12 tribes. God wanted to make sure no tribe was forgotten when the priest came before him. The priest would also wear a golden plate on their forehead with a sacred inscription. Chapter 28, verse 36, describes this holy crown. Make a plate of pure gold and engrave on it as on a seal, holy to the Lord. This reminded everyone, including the priest himself, that he was set apart for God's service. The consecration ceremony for the priests would involve sacrifices, anointing with oil, and 7 days of preparation. Chapter 29, verse 1 introduces this sacred ritual. This is what you are to do to consecrate them, so they may serve me as priests. Take a young bull and 2 rams without defect. These animals would be sacrificed to make the priests ceremonially clean. Chapter 29, verse 7 shows the anointing process. Take the anointing oil and anoint him by pouring it on his head. This oil would set Aaron apart as the high priest, the only person authorized to enter the most holy place on behalf of all Israel. The priests would offer sacrifices every morning and evening on behalf of the people. Chapter 29, verse 38 establishes this daily routine. This is what you are to offer on the altar regularly each day, 2 lambs a year old. These constant sacrifices would maintain the relationship between God and his people. In addition to the major pieces of furniture, God specified several other important items for worship. The altar of incense would be placed in front of the curtain that separated the holy place from the most holy place. Chapter 30, verse 1 describes this sacred furnishing. Make an altar of acacia wood for burning incense. The sweet-smelling smoke would rise up like prayers before God. This altar was much smaller than the bronze altar outside, but just as important for worship. Chapter 30, verse 2 gives its dimensions. It is to be square, a cubit long and a cubit wide, and 2 cubits high, its horns of 1 piece with it. Aaron would burn incense on this altar every morning and evening when he tended the lamps. Chapter 30, verse 6 shows where this altar was positioned. Put the altar in front of the curtain that shields the Ark of the Covenant Law, before the atonement. Cover that is over the tablets of the covenant law, where I will meet with you. The incense would create a fragrant cloud in the presence of God. Outside the tabernacle, between the tent and the bronze altar, would be a large bronze basin for washing. Chapter 30, verse 18 describes this essential item. Make a bronze basin with its bronze stand for washing. Place it between the tent of meeting and the altar and put water in it. The priests had to wash their hands and feet before approaching God. Chapter 30, verse 20 shows how critical this washing was. Whenever they enter the tent of meeting, they shall wash with water so that they will not die. Also, when they approach the altar to minister by presenting a food offering to the Lord, they shall wash their hands and feet so that they will not die. Cleanliness wasn't just preferred, it was a matter of life and death. God also gave Moses the recipe for holy anointing oil that would be used to consecrate the tabernacle and everything in it. Chapter 30, verse 23 lists the expensive ingredients. Take the following fine spices: 500 shekels of liquid myrrh, half as much of fragrant cinnamon, 250 shekels of fragrant calamus. This wasn't ordinary oil. It was a sacred blend that could never be used for anything else. Chapter 30, verse 25 describes how this oil was to be prepared. Make these into a sacred anointing oil, a fragrant blend, the work of a perfumer. It will be the sacred anointing oil. This oil would make everything it touched holy, set apart exclusively for God's service. God also provided instructions for making sacred incense with a specific recipe. Chapter 30, verse 34 lists the ingredients. Then the Lord said to Moses, take fragrant spices, gum resin, onycha and galbanum, and pure frankincense, all in equal amounts. Like the anointing oil, this incense was sacred and could never be duplicated for personal use. The penalty for making counterfeit holy oil or incense was severe. Chapter 30, verse 33 contains this stern warning. Whoever makes perfume like it and puts it on anyone other than a priest must be cut off from their people. God's holiness demanded that sacred things remain sacred. God didn't leave the construction of the tabernacle to chance or amateur builders. He specifically chose and equipped men with supernatural skill for this sacred work. Chapter 31, verse 2 introduces the chief craftsman. See, I have chosen Bezalel, son of Uri, the son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah. This man would oversee the entire construction project. Chapter 31, verse 3, shows how God equipped Bezalel for this enormous task. And I have filled him with the Spirit of God, with wisdom, with understanding, with knowledge, and with all kinds of skills. These weren't natural talents, they were supernatural gifts from God for building his sanctuary. Bezalel would be assisted by another specially gifted craftsman. Chapter 31, verse 6 introduces his partner. Moreover, I have appointed Oholiab, son of Ahisamach, of the tribe of Dan, to help him. Also I have given ability to all the skilled workers to make everything I have commanded you. God made sure there would be enough skilled hands for every aspect of the work. These men would be responsible for creating everything according to God's exact specifications. Chapter 31, verse 7 lists some of their responsibilities. The tent of meeting, the Ark of the Covenant law with the atonement cover on it, and all the other furnishings of the tent. Every single item had to be perfect, just as God had designed it. But even while giving instructions for this holy work, God reminded Moses about the importance of the Sabbath day. Chapter 31, verse 13 contains this crucial reminder. Say to the Israelites, you must observe my Sabbaths. This will be a sign between me and you for the generations to come, so you may know that I am the Lord, who makes you holy. The Sabbath command was so important that it applied even to the construction of God's own sanctuary. Chapter 31, verse 15 emphasizes this point. For 6 days work is to be done, but the seventh day is a day of Sabbath rest, holy to the Lord. Whoever does any work on the Sabbath day is to be put to death. Even sacred work had to stop for God's day of rest. Chapter 31, verse 17 explains why the Sabbath was so significant. It will be a sign between me and the Israelites forever. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. The Sabbath reminded people that God was the creator of everything. When God finished giving Moses all these detailed instructions, he gave him something incredible. Chapter 31, verse 18 describes this amazing moment. When the Lord finished speaking to Moses on Mount Sinai, he gave him the 2 tablets of the covenant law, the tablets of stone inscribed by the finger of God. These weren't human copies. They were written by God himself. While Moses was receiving God's perfect plans on the mountain, disaster was brewing in the camp below. The people grew impatient, waiting for Moses to return, and made a terrible decision. Chapter 32, verse 1 shows their faithless demand. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, "Come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him." Aaron, who should have stood firm against this rebellion, gave in to the pressure. Chapter 32, verse 2 shows his tragic compromise. Aaron answered them, "Take off the gold earrings that your wives, your sons, and your daughters are wearing and bring them to me." Instead of leading the people in faith, Aaron helped them create an idol. The people eagerly brought their gold jewelry, and Aaron melted it down to make a golden calf. Chapter 32, verse 4 describes this shocking moment. He took what they handed him and made it into an idol, cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. Then they said, "These are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." In one day, they had forgotten the true God who had performed so many miracles for them. Aaron made the situation even worse by building an altar and declaring a festival. Chapter 32 verse 5 shows his complete failure of leadership. When Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf and announced, "Tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord." He was trying to mix worship of the true God with worship of an idol. The next day the people held their pagan celebration with wild abandon. Chapter 32 verse 6 describes their shameful behavior. So the next day, the people rose early and sacrificed burnt offerings and presented fellowship offerings. Afterward, they sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in revelry. Their worship had become a drunken party. Up on the mountain, God told Moses exactly what was happening in the camp. Chapter 32 verse 7 shows God's anger. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go down, because your people, whom you brought up out of Egypt, have become corrupt." God was so angry that he referred to them as Moses' people, not his own. God's anger burned hot against their rebellion. Chapter 32 verse 10 reveals the full extent of his wrath. "Now leave me alone, so that my anger may burn against them, and that I may destroy them. Then I will make you into a great nation." God was ready to start over with Moses alone. When Moses came down from the mountain carrying the stone tablets, he heard the noise of the wild celebration. Chapter 32 verse 19 describes his reaction. When Moses approached the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, his anger burned, and he threw the tablets out of his hands, breaking them to pieces at the foot of the mountain. The tablets written by God's own finger were shattered, symbolizing the broken covenant. Moses immediately took action to stop the idolatry. Chapter 32 verse 20 shows his decisive response. "And he took the calf the people had made and burned it in the fire. Then he ground it to powder, scattered it on the water, and made the Israelites drink it. The golden god they had worshipped became bitter medicine they had to swallow." Moses confronted Aaron about his role in this disaster. Chapter 32 verse 21 shows Moses' pointed question. He said to Aaron, "What did these people do to you that you led them into such great sin?" Aaron's response was pathetic. He tried to blame the people and make the golden calf sound like an accident. The situation was so serious that Moses had to call for people to choose sides. Chapter 32 verse 26 shows his challenge. So he stood at the entrance to the camp and said, "Whoever is for the Lord, come to me." And all the Levites rallied to him. The tribe of Levi proved their loyalty to God and would later be rewarded with the priesthood. Moses gave the Levites a difficult command to restore order in the camp. Chapter 32 verse 27 contains his hard instructions. Then he said to them, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Each man strap a sword to his side. Go back and forth through the camp from one end to the other, each killing his brother and friend and neighbor." About 3,000 people died that day for their rebellion. The next day, Moses went back up the mountain to intercede for the people. Chapter 32 verse 31 shows his desperate prayer. So Moses went back to the Lord and said, "Oh, what a great sin these people have committed. They have made themselves gods of gold." Moses was heartbroken over Israel's failure. Chapter 32 verse 32 reveals the depth of Moses' love for his people. "But now, please forgive their sin, but if not, then blot me out of the book you have written." Moses was willing to give up his own salvation if it would save Israel. This was the heart of a true shepherd. God's response showed both justice and mercy. Chapter 32 verse 33 contains his reply. The Lord replied to Moses, "Whoever has sinned against me, I will blot out of my book." God would punish the guilty, but he wouldn't destroy the entire nation. Because of their sin, God said he wouldn't travel with them personally to the promised land. Chapter 33 verse 3 shows this heartbreaking decision. "Go up to the land flowing with milk and honey, but I will not go with you, because you are a stiff-necked people, and I might destroy you on the way." They could have the land, but not God's presence. This news devastated the people. Chapter 33, verse 4 describes their mourning. When the people heard these distressing words, they began to mourn, and no one put on any ornaments. They finally realized what they had lost through their rebellion. Moses set up a tent outside the camp where he could meet with God. Chapter 33, verse 7 describes this special place. Now, Moses used to take a tent and pitch it outside the camp, some distance away, calling it the tent of meeting. Anyone inquiring of the Lord would go to the tent of meeting outside the camp. God would meet with Moses there, but not in the camp with the people. Chapter 33, verse 11 shows the intimate relationship Moses had with God. The Lord would speak to Moses face to face, as one speaks to a friend. Even though God was angry with Israel, he still maintained his close relationship with Moses. Moses boldly asked God to show him his glory. Chapter 33, verse 18 contains this remarkable request. Then Moses said, "Now show me your glory." Moses wanted to see God as he really was, in all his divine majesty. God agreed to reveal himself, but with limitations. Chapter 33, verse 20 explains, "Why? But he said, 'You cannot see my face, for no one may see me and live.' Even Moses, who spoke with God face to face, couldn't look directly at God's face and survive." Chapter 33, verse 23 describes how God would reveal himself to Moses. "Then I will remove my hand and you will see my back, but my face must not be seen." Moses would see God's glory, but only from behind, after God had passed by. God told Moses to prepare new stone tablets to replace the ones that had been broken. Chapter 34, verse 1 contains this instruction. The Lord said to Moses, "Chisel out 2 stone tablets like the first ones, and I will write on them the words that were on the first tablets, which you broke." God was giving them another chance. Moses went up Mount Sinai again, carrying the blank tablets. Chapter 34, verse 4 describes his obedience. So Moses chiseled out 2 stone tablets like the first ones and went up Mount Sinai early in the morning as the Lord had commanded him, and he carried the 2 stone tablets in his hands. When God came down and passed in front of Moses, he proclaimed his own character. Chapter 34, verse 6 contains this amazing self-revelation. And he passed in front of Moses, proclaiming, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness." This wasn't just God's name, it was his nature. Chapter 34, verse 7 continues this revelation. Maintaining love to thousands and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children and their children for the sin of the parents to the 3rd and 4th generation. God was both merciful and just. Moses immediately fell down and worshipped, then begged God to go with them despite their failures. Chapter 34, verse 9 shows his humble plea. "Lord, if I have found favor in your eyes," he said, "then let the Lord go with us. Although this is a stiff-necked people, forgive our wickedness and our sin, and take us as your inheritance." God agreed to renew the covenant, but with stern warnings about avoiding idolatry. Chapter 34, verse 10, contains his promise. "Then the Lord said, I am making a covenant with you. Before all your people I will do wonders never before done in any nation, in all the world. The people you live among will see how awesome is the work that I, the Lord, will do for you." When Moses came down from the mountain this time, his face was shining so brightly that the people were afraid to come near him. Chapter 34, verse 30, describes this supernatural glow. When Aaron and all the Israelites saw Moses, his face was radiant, and they were afraid to come near him. Being in God's presence had left a visible mark on Moses. Moses had to wear a veil over his face when he wasn't speaking God's words to the people. Chapter 34, verse 33 shows this necessity. When Moses finished speaking to them, he put a veil over his face. The glory of God was too much for the people to look at directly. With the covenant renewed, Moses gathered the people to begin building the tabernacle according to God's instructions. Chapter 35, verse 4 shows his appeal. Moses said to the whole Israelite community, "This is what the Lord has commanded. From what you have, take an offering for the Lord. Everyone who is willing is to bring to the Lord an offering." The construction would depend on voluntary gifts, not forced contributions. The response was overwhelming. Chapter 35, verse 21 describes the people's generosity, and everyone who was willing and whose heart moved them came and brought an offering to the Lord for the work on the tent of meeting, for all its service, and for the sacred garments. There, hearts had been changed by God's mercy. People brought gold, silver, bronze, fine fabrics, animal skins, precious stones, and spices. Chapter 35, verse 22 shows their enthusiasm. All who were willing, men and women alike, came and brought gold, jewelry of all kinds, brooches, earrings, rings, and ornaments. They all presented their gold as a wave offering to the Lord. The same gold that had been used for the golden calf was now being given for God's sanctuary. The skilled workers, led by Bezalel and Oholiab, began their sacred work. Chapter 36, verse 1 describes their divine enablement. So Bezalel, Oholiab, and every skilled person to whom the Lord has given skill and ability to know how to carry out all the work of constructing the sanctuary are to do the work just as the Lord has commanded. The people brought so much material that the workers had to tell them to stop. Chapter 36, verse 6 shows this amazing problem. Then Moses gave an order, and they sent this word throughout the camp: "No man or woman is to make anything else as an offering for the sanctuary." And so the people were restrained from bringing more. For once, God's people had given too much rather than too little. The workers carefully crafted every item according to God's exact specifications. They made the ark, the table, the lampstand, the altars, and all the other furnishings with incredible skill and attention to detail. Chapter 39, verse 43 shows Moses' inspection. Moses inspected the work and saw that they had done it just as the Lord had commanded. So Moses blessed them. When everything was completed, Moses set up the tabernacle on the first day of the first month of the second year after leaving Egypt. Chapter 40, verse 17 marks this historic moment. So the tabernacle was set up on the first day of the first month in the second year. Exactly 1 year after the first Passover, God would have his dwelling place among his people. Moses arranged everything in its proper place: the ark behind the curtain, the table and lampstand in the holy place, the altars in their positions. Chapter 40, verse 33 shows the completion. Then Moses set up the courtyard around the tabernacle and altar, and put up the curtain at the entrance to the courtyard, and so Moses finished the work. As soon as Moses finished setting up the tabernacle, something magnificent happened. Chapter 40, verse 34 describes this climactic moment. Then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. God had come home to live among his people. The glory was so intense that even Moses couldn't enter. Chapter 40, verse 35 shows the overwhelming presence. Moses could not enter the tent of meeting because the cloud had settled on it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. The same God who had appeared in fire on Mount Sinai now dwelt in the beautiful sanctuary his people had built for him. From that day forward, the cloud would guide Israel's journey. Chapter 40, verse 36 describes this divine guidance. In all, The travels of the Israelites. Whenever the cloud lifted from above the tabernacle, they would set out. When God moved, they moved. When he stayed, they stayed. Chapter 40, verse 38 concludes the book of Exodus with this beautiful picture. So the cloud of the Lord was over the tabernacle by day, and fire was in the cloud by night, in the sight of all the Israelites during all their travels. The God who had rescued them from Egypt would be with them every step of the way to the promised land. If this journey through Exodus has opened your eyes to see God in a new way, I want to invite you to take the next step. Hit that subscribe button and join our community of people who are discovering the life-changing power of God's Word. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that their story isn't over. God is still writing amazing chapters in the lives of ordinary people. And don't forget to ring that notification bell so you'll be the first to know when we release our next deep dive into Scripture. Because if Exodus has taught us anything, it's that the best is yet to come when God is leading the way. Thanks for joining me on this incredible adventure through one of the most powerful books ever written. Until next time, remember, the same. God who split the Red Sea wants to do the impossible in your life too.